Major offensive operations of the Ukrainian armed forces in Zaporizhia, Dnipro, Kherson, and Antonivka Bridge, Donetsk region, and near Luhansk continue at full speed. Simultaneously, violent clashes occur on all these critical front lines. You know that the Ukrainians liberated the last Rivnopil in Zaporizhia and liberated a total of 9 settlements in this region from the Russians. Then the offensive plans of Kiev continued in the direction of Dnipro, Kherson. Ukrainian troops managed to sink Russian boats in this area and took control of the Antonivka Bridge in the Kherson direction. After all these offensive operations, Russia was stuck in Zaporizhia, but the attacks of the Ukrainians continued where they left off. While many war analysts and military experts debated which front line would be the next target of the Ukrainian armed forces, Kiev's offensive plan refocused on the Zaporizhia region. This time, the Ukrainians chose Berdyansk, one of the important port cities. Numerous explosions were heard in the city in total. Local residents in the city have long reported that they have not witnessed this many eruptions before. Let's explore the breaking moments of this critical offensive operation together. Recently, 11 powerful explosions occurred in Berdyansk. As a result of the explosions, huge black clouds formed in the city's airspace. The target of the attacks was the military airport controlled by the Russian army. This military airfield, which was used as the command center and operation area of the Russian army in the city of Berdyansk, was badly damaged after the attacks. Russian sources confirmed this striking attack. According to images taken from the scene of the attack, the airport was successfully hit and a large fire broke out in the area. Russian authorities announced that the Ukrainian armed forces used UK-made Storm Shadow missiles in the attack on the airport. The range of these missiles makes it possible to hit the rear facilities of the Russian armed forces, including those in Berdyansk. Therefore, it is quite logical for the Ukrainians to use Storm Shadow missiles in this attack, because only the Storm Shadow long-range missiles, which are currently in the inventory of the Ukrainian army, can cover the distance between the area of the attack and the Berdyansk airport. The resistance movement also shared critical assessments about the attack on the military airbase used by the Russians in Berdyansk. Agents of the attack resistance movement were the first to report that the attack on Berdyansk was effective. Artesh then released another message stating that the situation for the Russians was very, very bad. Russia thinks that after these attacks, the Ukrainians no longer recognize borders and that these attacks will eventually reach Crimea within the scope of Kiev's offensive plans. When we consider the recent offensive operations of the Ukrainian armed forces, we can see that these concerns of the Russians are correct, because the port city of Berdyansk is one of the important centers for Kiev to create a land attack corridor extending to the Crimea. If you have noticed, Ukrainians are trying to reach Crimea by targeting especially the coastal cities. Therefore, it is quite normal to have southern front lines such as Dnipro, Zaporizhia, Melitopol, Tokhmok, and Kherson in Kiev's offensive plans. The actions of Ukrainian partisans in Melitopol and Tokhmok continue from where they left off. Partisan groups supporting Kiev, which gained strength from the successes of the Ukrainian armed forces in critical areas such as Zaporizhia and Dnipro, also strengthened their resistance actions. On the Kherson side, as you know, we can say that the remains of Russians are found in the city. The Kherson direction turned into hell for Russian troops as Ukrainian troops captured most of the supply routes from Dnipro and Zaporizhia. Already with the destruction of some dams in Novar, Kakhovka, and Kherson, the trenches of the Russians in these areas were underwater. Now the Ukrainians, who have taken full control of Kherson with the big offensive plans of Kiev, do not allow the small Russian attack groups here to increase. Again, on the Russian side, this advance of the Ukrainian army created an atmosphere of chaos and anxiety. Before continuing our video, I would like to remind you again, if you are against the invasion of Ukraine and want to support our work with my team, you can like our video, comment, and hit the super thanks button below. especially important Russian military bases, ports and logistics lines in Melitopol, Berdyansk, Mariupol, and Kherson are attacked. The purpose of these attacks is to get behind enemy lines, to secure certain lines, to create positions for further attacks, using more troops and equipment to achieve these goals and objectives. Ukrainian troops are attacking many points on the front line so that the Russian troops do not fully understand where the real blow will be delivered. Ukrainian forces employ excellent diversion with unconventional tactics. The best practice of this so far has been in the most critical region between Crimea and Ukraine. The Chongar Bridge connecting Crimea to Kherson and Melitopol was damaged 120 kilometers behind the lines. Chongar bridges connecting Kherson region and temporarily occupying Crimea were hit at night. Russian investigators said that 4 missiles were fired by Ukrainian forces on the bridge, the Russian state news agency reported. It was reported that traffic on them was stopped. Vladimir Saldo, head of the Russian occupation administration of Kherson Oblast, claimed without providing any evidence that more than one bridge had been attacked, that the criminal Kiev regime had carried out barbaric bombardment of civilian objects such as bridges near Chongar, on the administrative border between Kherson Oblast and Crimea. After the damage to the bridges, the route of the Russian occupation, troops from Melitopol to the Crimea immediately increased by 100 kilometers as the shoulder passing through Armyansk was much longer. Moreover, the roads in this section are in a much worse condition in terms of pavement quality. On the other hand, Russian blogs published online images from the Gyeongsi region. One of the Russian blogs claims that the attacks took place around 5 a.m. The footage shows a column of smoke rising after the attacks. Later, a propagandist crosses the Chongar Bridge and shows the results. There are 2 through holes 100 meters apart. On the main bridge, there is another crater on the bridge next to it. Both bridges are road bridges. Then Saldo comes to the bridge. Saldo gives orders to Kiev stating that the UK is guilty of the missile attack. Saldo threatened to retaliate and expressed his readiness to give the Kremlin the coordinates of all the bridges in Odessa on the banks of the Prut and Danube rivers and the port of Georgiulesti. This port is a regional logistics hub with the EU. It is Moldova's only port with access to the Black Sea. By 2030, the entire area around the port will have free economic zone status. So for what purpose did the Ukrainian armed forces hit the Chongar bridges before continuing our video? I would like to remind you again, if you are against the invasion of Ukraine and want to support our work with my team, you can like our video, comment, and hit the super thanks button below. There are 3 main vehicle bridges and 2 railway bridges connecting Crimea to mainland Ukraine in 3 regions. The isthmus near Armyansk with bridges over the North Crimean Canal, the town of Chongar with bridges across the Sivish Lagoon, and Henichesk with a bridge connecting the town to Ukraine. These strategic ports play a vital role in the Russian military logistics network, facilitating transportation between occupied Crimea and Kherson Oblast. Crimea relies on the land bridge in southern Ukraine, which Russia captured in the early stages of its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and the Kerch Strait Bridge, which it built after Russia's invasion of Crimea, to connect it with Russia's Krasnodar. Also, Saldo claimed that Ukraine used British Storm Shadow missiles to target the bridge. Judging by the photos, Saldo shared not only the pavement, but also the power structures on the bridges were damaged. While the construction of the Chongar bridges is inspected, the building occupants direct all traffic over Armyansk. Officials appointed by Russia in Crimea stated that it may take weeks for the bridge to be completely repaired, but the traffic can continue on a single lane, and noted that there are 2 more crossings. The breaking of the Chongar bridges to occupied Crimea will seriously complicate the logistics of the Russian army, which was formerly used to transport ammunition, equipment, fuel and lubricants and food along this road. But now the optimal corridor has been severely damaged and the Russians will have to go a long way from Armyansk. All this compels the Russian troops to actively maneuver. They feel insecure to ensure the defense of these reserves. Russia needs constant deliveries of ammunition, shells, and weapons. Accordingly, they drove them out of the Crimea, which is now a fairly serious Russian military base. Ukrainian soldiers are also attacking and damaging logistics facilities to cause bullet starvation among Russian reserves. So what other weapons does the armed forces of Ukraine have to carry out such attacks? Depending on the range and efficiency of destroying stronger bridges, storm shadows were most likely used. It takes a serious load to break the bridge deck. Of course, we can say that this was done by a drone. There should be drones carrying explosives between 40–50 kilograms. It can also be assumed that these are GMLRS missiles for HIMARS systems, but still the range is not the same. This is actually a distance of 80 kilometers. There may also be GLSDB missiles for the HIMARS system with a range of up to 150 kilometers. It is Storm Shadow carefully used to defeat any target beyond 150. Time range is either drones or Storm Shadows. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces are successfully expanding the bridgehead westward. Ukrainian forces began advancing across the hollow last day to attack Russian positions from the north. Today, several sources have confirmed that Ukrainian forces have completely captured this area. All Russian defense in the area is based on a network of trenches located between the Arabian Bianchi and the forest. Ukrainian forces had already been spotted moving along the rows of trees to attack these fortifications. Therefore, the Ukrainian forces were about 700 meters from the settlement, not only to the east but also to the north. Also, some leading Russian sources started to mention that logistical problems are not only seen in the Lukov-Jeri-Bianchi section of the road, but also in Lysina-Lujo. Some sources also reported clashes between Ukrainian and Russian troops about 1.2 kilometers from Lujo. This meant that Ukrainian forces had cleared the tree line to the west of the chute, which immediately resulted in a large number of it shows that it exposes the Russian position and, most importantly, the logistics. By controlling the fields just above these two settlements, it becomes incredibly difficult to supply Russian troops on the zero line. In fact, the Russian authorities have made it clear that they are not sure of the stability of this front line by initiating the evacuation of the regional government in Vasilivka, 10 kilometers from Bianchi. A few days ago, the occupation authorities closed all government facilities, stopped issuing passports and other documents, and moved to Vesely, 55 kilometers south of Vasilivka. Another reason Russian troops fear that their defenses may collapse in this area is that the reservoir has almost completely dried up. 20 kilometers of water gradually turned into a desert, and Ukrainian forces could pass through it and launch a powerful mechanized attack from the least protected part of the contact line. Another rank Russian general was neutralized this week in Zaporizhia in the second phase of the massive Ukrainian offensive. The Kremlin is quiet, stunning details, and our incredible triumphs at the front are in the details. At the moment, we see that the most critical line of the front is the line of conflict between Zaporizhia and Donetsk. An incredible video emerged of troops raiding Russian positions as Ukraine attacked 4 areas. Ukrainian troops liberated the critical village of Blahodaytyn, east of Zaporizhia in the western Zaporizhia Oblast. Ukraine is reportedly making local gains in the region's southwest and southeast of Orikhiv. According to Zaporizhia Oblast occupation official Vladimir Rogov, Ukraine is launching night attacks to take advantage of the 3 factors as the war continued at full speed. Another development took place that would upset Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Russian invaders were in a difficult situation along the line of contact in the Donetsk and Zaporizhia regions as a result of the Ukrainian offensive. According to information confirmed by Western and Russian intelligence, senior Russian Major General Sergei Goryachev was killed during the conflict in the Zaporizhia region the other day. Major General Sergei Goryachev, 52, Chief of Staff of the 35th United Arms Army, was killed as a result of a missile attack in the Russian-occupied Donetsk region south of the village of Velikaya, Novosilka. While the Ukrainian army won the villages with a counterattack, it was reported that the general who led the Russian troops in the same region was killed. The missile attacks that hit the Russian general's base were Stormy Shadow. So far, British-made Stormy Shadows have had 100% success in destroying major Russian bases in Luhansk, Berdyansk, Melitopol, and Mariupol. At least 4 more Russian generals have been killed since the start of the war last February. The latest reported death comes days after Ukraine launched a counteroffensive aimed at recapturing territory captured by Russian forces during the full-scale invasion. As of June 2nd, at least 4 Russian generals, 58 colonels and 176 lieutenant colonels had been killed in Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine, according to the anti-Putin Russian news outlet Mediazona. This includes Major General Karamat Tashev, Major General Vladimir Frolov, Major General Roman Kutuzov, and Major General Andrei Sukhovetsky. Last month, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported that 2 Russian colonels were killed in a shootout near the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut in the Donetsk region. Goryachev graduated from the Ryazan Guards Higher Airborne Command School in 1994 and previously served in Transnistria and Tajikistan. After Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he became the commander of the 5th Separate Tank Brigade and was promoted to deputy commander of the 35th Combined Arms Army, where he was appointed Chief of Staff. After saying little about the escalation in Ukrainian military action for a week, President Zelensky confirmed the start of the counterattack on Saturday afternoon. On Saturday, Kiev forces conducted counterattack operations in at least 4 frontline areas, according to the Washington-based think tank. He reported that Ukrainian forces had made gains in the Bakhmut area, with the Ukrainian army advancing up to 1,400 meters in some areas. In addition, Russian sources also reported that Ukraine is operating in the Luhansk Oblast near Bilohorivka. And on Sunday afternoon, a video appeared allegedly showing the liberation of the village of Blahodaytn in the Donetsk region. Before continuing our video, I would like to remind you again, if you are against the invasion of Ukraine and want to support the work we do with my team, you can like our video, comment, and hit the super thanks button below. The main focus of the attacks of the Ukrainian armed forces is the complete recovery of southern Ukraine when southern Ukraine recovers. Kiev troops will be able to focus on Crimea more easily. The cities of Melitopol, Berdyansk, and Mariupol need to be liberated in order to focus more comfortably on the Crimea. In addition, in recent days, when counterattack operations have gained momentum, Ukrainian forces continue to carry out daring attacks on strategic areas. As it is known, cutting the enemy's logistics is a classic strategy. If you hit valuable targets, you can neutralize the only advantage of the Russian army, namely its mass. The other day, partisans blew up the Russian-controlled railway bridge near occupied Melitopol. Russian troops used the bridge in the town of Yakimivka to supply weapons from the Crimea. It was noted that the bridge serves as part of the arms supply artery from the Crimea to the Zaporizhia region. Mayor in exile, Ivan Fedorov, said that this explosion blocked an important Russian logistics route near occupied Melitopol in Zaporizhia Oblast. According to Ivan Fedorov, Russian forces lost 5 freight cars and a 50-meter railway line as a result of the explosions. Fedorov reported that the explosion occurred at the most opportune moment when a train carrying stolen ore was on the track. Explosions regularly occur in occupied territories as local Ukrainian partisan movements target Russian authorities, collaborators, and Russian military equipment. While Moscow generally blames Ukraine for such incidents, Kiev does not take responsibility for the explosions. Also on June 11th, an explosion occurred on the railway tracks in the Kirovsky district of Crimea. The explosion occurred at around 1600 hours when a freight train was passing through this section. Preliminary information shows serious damage to the infrastructure of the railway line. Making a statement about the situation, Crimean President Sergei Aksyonov said that the train traffic in this section stopped due to the explosion. By whom and how the explosion was carried out, it has not yet been disclosed to the public. This part of the railway was used by Russian soldiers to transport military equipment. At least 6 explosions were heard near Russian-occupied Melitopol in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast last week, according to Ivan Fedorov. 5 explosions were heard in Melitopol. The explosions caused heavy smoke in the north of Melitopol. At least 1 explosion was also reported on a railway in the Dolinsky district near Melitopol. Russian forces used this railway to transport military equipment and personnel. The biggest purpose of the Ukrainian armed forces attacking the railways is to disrupt Russia's supply lines. Another stopover point for the Ukrainian attacks is Berdyansk. Berdyansk is a port city on the southern coast of Ukraine, on the coast of the Sea of U-200 BU. 200 bays of the port city has been occupied by Russian forces since the first days of the conflict. Berdyansk had previously been targeted by Ukrainian forces. The city is located on the coast of Mariupol, a region believed to be among the places that Ukraine will try to retake in its counterattack. A large cloud of smoke was seen rising from the port area in the Sea of Azov. Russian state media outlet RT stated that there was loss and destruction in the attack, whose precise target was not immediately clear. Rogov speculated that the attack may have been carried out by British Storm Shadow missiles, a long-range cruise missile with stealth capabilities that the United Kingdom had recently supplied to Ukraine. Berdyansk is about 100 kilometers from the front line deep in Russian-controlled territory. This means that using Storm Shadow missiles would be a possible option. As it is known, Ukrainian forces have recently started using long-range Storm Shadow missiles supplied by the United Kingdom, which can hit targets deep within Russian-occupied areas. Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov stated that all Storm Shadow missiles launched by the Ukrainian army on May 28 hit their targets. On the other hand, the purpose of the attacks of Melitopol and Berdyansk is to soften the land route to Crimea. So what's going on in the Crimean Peninsula lately? Before continuing our video, I would like to remind you again, if you are against the invasion of Ukraine and want to support our work with my team, you can like our video, comment, and hit the super thanks button below. Sergei Aksyonov, the so-called head of the Russian administration in Crimea, reported that an unmanned aerial vehicle attack was carried out on the temporarily occupied peninsula on the night of the 15th of June. 9 UAVs were registered on the territory of the Republic of Crimea. Aksyonov claimed that 3 of the unmanned aerial vehicles were shot down by electronic warfare assets, and 6 unmanned aerial vehicles were shot down by air defense forces. In addition, the direction of the Ukrainian attacks was diverted to the Russian radar station in Crimea, a Russian radar station used to control Ukraine's southern coast, and most of the Black Sea was damaged in temporarily occupied Crimea. Satellite images of a Russian radar station located on the Tarkhankut Peninsula on the western coast of Crimea have emerged, as reported by the Crimean Partisans Telegram channel. The pictures show a hole in the dome of the station. In fact, these are the eyes that control the entire southern coast of Ukraine and a significant part of the Black Sea. Destroying these eyes would mean significantly weakening Russian troops, aviation, and air defense. On the other hand, the Russian army strengthens the Crimea against Ukraine's counterattack. Satellite images are emerging. According to satellite images, it was seen that the Russian army has built several defense lines in Crimea from the administrative border of Ukraine to Yankovich. These images provided by Planet Labs provide a glimpse into Russia's strategic military maneuvers on the embattled peninsula. The footage shows that most of these trenches were dug by the Russian army after its withdrawal from Kherson. Satellite images of the northern part of Crimea show a striking pattern where Russian military positions are often set up near villages or even in settlements. According to Ukrainian Armed Forces officer and Crimean investigative journalist Yevhen Leshin, this strategy is in line with typical behavior of the Russian army. The new trenches prepared to defend the Crimea are located near the village of Filatovskaya, the checkpoint in Armyansk, the town of Krasno-Perekopsk, and around Jonko. As a result, counter-offensive operations are moving in Ukraine's favor. It looks like the attacks on the front lines will intensify in the coming days. The performance of Moscow troops in the face of these attacks will paint a clearer picture of the course of the war, in particular the attack on the airbase controlled by the Russian troops in Berdyansk and the continuous advance of the Ukrainians in the Zaporizhia Kherson-Dnipro areas pushed Moscow to retaliate plans. Russia continued to target Ukrainian cities with missile and drone strikes this week, killing 12 people on Tuesday, including 3 teenagers in one of its deadliest attacks in recent months. At least 60 more were injured when a pizza restaurant was targeted in Kramatorsk, a city in the eastern Donetsk region that is under Ukrainian control but close to the Russian-occupied parts of the country. These attacks were strongly condemned by international sources because with these attacks, the Russians targeted innocent civilians. Ria Pizza was a popular venue that regularly hosted international journalists, volunteers, and Ukrainian soldiers. Taking a break from the nearby fronts, Zelensky announced that a Russian agent allegedly involved in the attack has been arrested and will be charged with treason. Since the beginning of June, several deadly missile and drone strikes have been carried out across the country, including the capital, Kiev, Zaporizhia, and the southern port of Odessa. A residential area in Zelensky's hometown of Kryvyi Rih was also hit. But these Russian attacks never discouraged the Ukrainians, and Kiev's offensive operations continued to advance steadily. So the Ukrainian counter-offensive continues in the eastern Donetsk and southeastern Zaporizhia regions, and the Kiev authorities claim to have taken the strategic initiative near the city of Bakhmut. So with which tactics did Ukraine go towards an invincible victory in the great offensive that the Ukrainian forces have been carrying out for about 4 weeks? That's why the UK's Ministry of Defence said in an assessment on Saturday that Ukraine is making good progress in some areas where it has infiltrated the first line of Russian defense. The MOD went into detail about Russia's performance, saying Russia's performance was mixed. He noted that while some units were likely conducting reliable maneuvering defensive operations, others were retreating in some disorder amid growing reports that Russian casualties were rising as they retreated from their own minefields. By August last year, the British Ministry of Defence reported that 10 Russian generals had been killed. The cumulative effect on command consistency likely adds to Russia's tactical and operational challenges, the MOD wrote. In other words, we can say that the cost of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine was extremely heavy for the Kremlin. The Ukrainian General Staff claimed in May that the total number of Russian troops killed or wounded during its full-scale invasion of Ukraine exceeded 200,000. The figure means that Russia has lost a huge number of soldiers, currently estimated at 220,000. This figure surpasses all serving armed forces of many countries. As you may recall, only 3 NATO armies have more total regular troops than this number: the United States, Turkey, and France, while the other 28 members all have fewer serving members. On the other hand, Ukraine focuses on night operations in some regions. The goal is to reduce the efficiency of our aviation, avoid losses from the stun company's precision hits of kamikaze drones, and make the most of the benefits of using it. Western supplied equipment includes superior night optics, which gives Ukrainian forces a significant advantage over Russian forces. It was also shared that to support this stock, Zelensky received new military aid commitments during his meeting with visiting Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at the weekend. Ukraine, on the other hand, is leading its offensive to gain ground and inflict casualties with skilled infantry units, deliberate attacks, and small-scale offensive tactics. The long-awaited counter-offensive of the armed forces of Ukraine in the first week has so far been deliberate and methodical. It combined infantry, drones, and armored vehicles in targeted attacks against short-range targets, usually no more than 1 or 2 forest lines or villages. Independent information sources and Russian military bloggers all agree that Kiev's top military leadership has so far followed the conservative strategy of eroding Russian formations over time, gradually gaining ground, avoiding major risks, and limiting Ukrainian losses as much as possible. After a slow-paced offensive designed to keep Ukrainian casualties to a minimum, the Kremlin aims to defeat its troops locally. On the other hand, even pro-Russian sources admit that Ukraine's deliberate tactics are undeniably gaining ground as out of the ordinary. The Russian defense is under increasing pressure. In addition, the consequences of the revolt of Russia's Wagner mercenaries and its possible consequences for President Vladimir Putin continue to be analyzed. After this insurgency, Ukraine continued its counter-offensive operations, and the Kiev administration reports that its forces advanced about 2 kilometers along the chief columns southwest of Bakhmut and made gains. Ukrainian forces also continued to conduct offensive operations with the US-based Institute for War Studies and reported significant clashes in various areas along the front line. Following these statements, President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that it was a happy day for Ukraine, but Zelensky didn't give much detail on this or talk about any particular area. Ukrainian forces have also reportedly made gains in the southern Kherson region, crossing the Dnipro River and establishing a foothold on the left bank of the river. According to pro-Russian war bloggers, the latest possible advances came after the 24-hour mutiny of the Wagner mercenary group that ended 200 km south of Moscow. This rebellion ended when Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko mediated between Yevgeny Prigozhin and Putin. But Ukrainian officials claim that the countdown for Putin had begun after the Wagner rebellion in the Ukrainian capital. Attention was focused directly on the revolt of the Wagner group, its leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, and its consequences for Vladimir Putin and the course of the war in Ukraine. The drama on the Russian border reinforced the view in Kiev that Putin's term as Russian president is over. President Zelensky's closest advisor, Andriy Yermak, stated that Putin does not have much time left in power. At a briefing in Kiev, Andriy Yermak noted the year Russia invaded Ukraine for the first time, annexing the Crimean Peninsula. Then Yermak explained that Ukraine has become obvious to the whole world, which they have seen since 2014. Yermak, as well as senior Ukrainian officials, all argued that President Putin would not be able to overcome a disastrous loss of authority. According to Kiev officials, the Wagner rebellion and Mr. Prigozhin's blaming the Kremlin's motives for war also stripped away what was left of Mr. Putin's chance to hold on. It is very important to remember that what Ukrainians, especially those who run the country, say about their Russian enemies comes in the heat of a war that they rightly view as a struggle for national survival. The Ukrainians have waged a clever media war and are remarkably consistent in their messages to their own people and Western allies as well as to their enemies in Moscow. For this reason, Kiev's assessments of the Wagner rebellion mirrored the situation in Russia. For although the Wagner revolt is over, Vladimir Putin has undoubtedly faced the most serious challenge to his authority since he became president in 2000. Other senior officials in Kiev say they are convinced that the unofficial but organized networks of disillusioned insiders are against Mr. Putin. Alexei Danilov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, thinks there may be a new leader in Russia. Danilov reported that among them are security forces, officials, and representatives of Russian oligarchs who believe that Putin's decision to launch a full-blown invasion of Ukraine in February last year is both a personal disaster for them and a threat to Russia. After the last uprising in Russia, Oleksiy Danilov was among those who thought that Putin's term of power was over. When asked if he had evidence to support his analysis, Mr. Danilov, in his early 60s, wearing a military-style black suit and inscribed his surname on his chest badge, pointed directly to what was happening on the Russian border and in Belarus. Mikhailo Podolyak, another close advisor to President Zelensky, also agrees that there are several groups of people in Russia who want to take power. Podolyak claimed that Putin's top-down and authoritarian system has almost left a vacuum in the center of power. Another senior official, speaking on condition of anonymity, went even further, suggesting that President Putin would have to sack Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of Staff General Valery Gerasimov, perhaps in response to another military setback. In fact, for Russia, the most important negative result of the Wagner rebellion in the short term was that it contributed to the successful progress of the offensive plan of the Ukrainian army. But Russian sources, Moscow officials, and other Kremlin supporter groups are currently highlighting the mistakes of the Russian administration by not focusing on the successful progress of the offensive operations by the Ukrainian army due to the vacuum created by Wagner. Yes, perhaps the fundamental solution for Russian citizens is the change of regime. But if the offensive plans of the Ukrainians continue in this way, the Moscow regime will automatically change because no country's citizens or opposition political officials can afford such failures.